Okay, I'll go ahead and get started. Our last speaker for this session is Mark Dodero from RECON Environmental, and he's going to be talking about habitat restoration and enhancement for 2 rare clay endemic plants.
Good morning. Thanks for having us for the talk. And this project we're going to talk about is a SANDAG grant-funded project for management. SANDAG is the San Diego Association of Governments. And a few years back, San Diego County voters voted in for a transnet tax, which pays for both transportation projects as well as management for the preserve areas for the HCPs and land acquisition. So we're going to go through, so the 3-year project's going to go through and just kind of show you the sequence of what we did. So the project area is down here in city of Chula Vista. Here's the city of San Diego. There's the Mexican border. And in 2003, we did baseline surveys for the city of Chula Vista and the Central City Preserve. So we did inventory, censuses of plants, and mapping. And we wrote area-specific management directives that talked about how to do long-term management for these species. And the grant proposal that we wrote for the SANDAG grant was consistent with these management directives. The project goals were to increase the habitat for these species by controlling weeds. There were perennial weeds such as fennel and artichoke thistle that were taking over some of the habitat, as well as just a lot of annual grasses and mustard, things like that. We also propagated purple needlegrass and planted those, and also there were other sensitive species in those areas that were benefiting from the project. The areas where the Central City Preserve was set aside originally as open space as associated with the developments there, and then later on, that was back in the early 90s, and then later on the city of Chula Vista had their MSCP program in early 2000s, and so the Central City Preserve was incorporated into the MSCP because there were so many sensitive species there. The 2 target species for this program was Otay tar plant, which is Denandra conjugans, and then San Diego thornmint, which is Canthamitha ilicifolia. Both of them are clay endemic species, and the tolerance of soil types for the tar plant is a little bit broader. The thornmint's more restricted to really friable types of clay, and both of the species are federally and state listed. And Otay tar plant occurs just in extreme southern San Diego County and just across the border into Mexico. And then San Diego thornmint is in coastal areas of San Diego, and then in northwestern Baja, maybe 150 miles south of the border it ranges. A couple of other sensitive species I just mentioned were Deadlia variegata here, which is a little geophyte. It's drought deciduous, so it'll respond to the rains, get a little rosette leaves. You know, they like about that big for a big one, you know, and then they'll flower. And then small flowered morning glory, which is Convolvulus simulans, which is a CNPS plant. Here's some views of some of the habitat areas. You can see major fennel invasion in some of these areas, and it's like, obviously no annuals are going to be able to compete with that, the natives anyway. And then also there was smaller areas of artichoke thistle among the sea of non-native grasses. When you get all this weed load, the gophers go to like hyperactivity and basically start rototilling 100% of the ground. And there's little thornmint seedlings here, and it's obvious when you get a pile of dirt on you, you don't photosynthesize very well, so that's a problem. And in other areas, when we've done projects where we had lots of gopher activity, as we controlled the weeds, the gophers go down to a normal level without, trying to control them at all. Here's one of the sites where you can see there's this choke with non-native grasses and fennel there, and I'll show you some pictures later that are after the project's implemented. In 2011, we went ahead and collected some of the thornmint and tar plant for dispersing into suitable habitat later on in the project. And we wanted to get some weed control going first before we put the seeds out, because obviously there was a lot of non-native cover. Our crews, you can see one of them back here, and they're doing a technique we call dethatching, and they use weed eaters to go ahead and cut down the non-native species And then we go ahead and put, you can see here, there's like, 7, 8 foot tall mustards there. So it was a really choked area. The crew then rakes up the dried material, and we do this in the fall when things are dormant. It's out of the bird breeding season and so on to minimize impacts to native species. And then they put the material in tarps and then haul it off. This was isolated. There were no roads right to the spot, so we just took it up to the edge of the bushes and let it compost there, which saved money than instead of hauling it out. When the crews uses the weed eaters, here's purple needlegrass, so they go around those. The crews have been trained to detect, distinguish between native plants and non-native plants, and so after dethatching, and one of the things might ask, why didn't you mow it mechanically? Well, one, there was no access, for a mechanism. Plus, you're going to cause a lot of disturbance if you do mechanical mowing, because you're driving all over the place. So, that's the best technique for these areas for doing this. Here you can see this is after the dethatching and after the first rains or so, and so. When that thatch is built up over the years, those weeds are mulching themselves. So even when they go through these dry periods like we're getting in January, it's like they don't seem to die back as much from the drought. They're not as affected by that. So once you expose them, like that, then they're not mulching themselves and they're much more susceptible to drought. And then also you can see the actual seedlings that you're working on that the crew can recognize. One of the things that we had to do was there were unauthorized bike trails going through these habitats, so we put in some fences to kind of channel the bikes in so they weren't going off, into the main habitat. Because, you're not going to be able to fight the bikers to, get them to stop going there, so at least we kind of contained them. The first year we did do some small thornment patches of seeding, just kind of experimentally, and we wanted to keep them small because we hadn't done follow-up weeding yet. Plus, these were small enough, you could do a little bit of hand weeding there within the budget we had. Here you can see the seedlings of Centennial thornmint there, and there's otite tar plant. And this is about maybe a month or so after the germinating rains. Take 3 or 4 day rain cycle, and you get them to come up. So this is about a month later. Our crews are spraying here. This is with the follow-up spraying. They're spraying glyphosate, and which is a non-selective herbicide. But these crews, guys, they're benefited employees. Some have been working for RECON for as long as 15 years, so they know the native plants. If they don't know something, they ask us, like, is this good? And so on. So it's a good system. One thing we didn't spray in the thornment areas because the populations are small enough. Okay, we dethatched there, but we didn't do spraying just to be safe with those. In the tar plant areas, since the populations were larger, we went in and put pin flags where we saw seedlings or concentrations of seedlings in front of the crew spraying. So they had, okay, slow down here. Plus they're good at finding them. We give them their own pin flags too, and so they find more, and so we're trying to be careful doing that. Here's some of the native plant associates, wild onion, Allen precox, and then blue-eyed grass Sisyrinchium. And then here we have Zygodinus there on the left, and Plumeria crocea, common golden star. So there's a lot of bulb species in that habitat. So this was the spring of the first season after dethatching. So you can see the thornment, or the little white flowers going back through that area. And we did those small experimental seeding plots, and the plants, that we did, seeded in, they flowered and produced some seed, you can see there. And so when they do that, as we were weeding the areas, then we kind of, distribute the seed a little wider, each season. Here's the tar plant, the yellow flowered plant growing, and this is in a detached only area that's associated with the thornment as well. So here's, each season we would map as part of the monitoring So you can see areas of the yellow, that's the tar plant, purple's kind of thorn mint. So you can see in this matrix of the canyon with the urban development, this is kind of the clay grassland, clay lens area. And on this side of the canyon, it's actually maritime succulent scrub. So there's gnatcatchers and cactus wrens on that side. We actually had a grant to work on that to promote cactus wren habitat at the same time on a separate grant. We collected additional seeds, the tar plant and thorn mint. We held on to the tar plant seed that we collected until the fall before the last year of the project. You can see some of the other annual plants and bulb species that we also collected and put out the last fall. As part of that, we collected purple needlegrass type of pulchra, and we have the RECON native plant nursery down by the Tijuana River Valley, close to the border. And so we propagated 6,000 grasses there. And they were first little seedlings and growing along just before planting. And then our crew planted the 6,000 grasses throughout the 3 little preserved subunits that we were working in. So you can see there were little rose pots. So we got pretty good rain within a week after we planted, because this was remote, there was no irrigation or anything. So you just try to time it best you can for the rain. So here was in February 2003. So each year, the emergence of the seedlings is totally correlated with the rain, as you would expect. You know, so some years you see them in December, some January, February, and so on. So there's the tar plant you can see, and if there's multiple germination events, you see what looks like, you know, different cohorts of seedlings of different sizes in these areas. Here's one of the seeded plots of thorn mint when it's in vegetative stage, and here's some of them flowering close up. And here's a patch with a, you know, kind of an overview of one of the seeded plots in the second year. So you can see all the white flowers. That's the thorn mint. We did, you know, there we didn't, like I said, we didn't spray in the thorn mint area. Outside, but you can see it's cleaner there. That's where follow-up spray did occur on the edges. In some places, there were really high population densities of native bulbs, and so in those places, we didn't want to spray there, so you can see yellow mustard there. So the crew was going in and kind of just topping off the inflorescence in some of these areas, so we didn't have to spray. And so, you know, we did different kind of treatments depending on what was going on, and some days you look at what the crew's doing, and oh, I kind of going too slow today, let's do this, you know, so it's a lot of adaptive management on the fly doing this. Here's another one of the seeded patches of thorn mint, and here's one of the crew guys who's one of our best weed eater guys, and so, you know, working with me directly, he could go in there and use the weed eater and just, you know, sit there and top the mustard flowers off. He's kind of like a surgeon with a weed eater, you know, so that's good. I'm sure that's like an HMO you'd want to sign up for. So, you know, that was helpful to reduce some of the seed set of the non-natives. And here's just some of the natural populations of thorn mint in spring 2013. On the left, there's tar plant, and then here's another variegata, which has that, you know, those an inflorescence about that tall, and it's co-occurring with Otay tar plant. And part of this, and we've done this in the past, actually done pollinator collections, but, you know, do some qualitative monitoring of pollinators just to see what's going on. You see native bee on the Otay plant, tar plants, and then also butterfly. And here's a kind of a before we dethatched there on that side, and maybe there was way less than 100 tar plants in that area, and historically, that place, I've seen it where like there might have been 10,000 at one point in time. So the weeds over the years have been encroaching and just crowding out the plants. So here's the same spot in year 2. So all of that is Otay tar plant in that spot. So it's looking way better. Okay. Here's in January 14. So of course this is our drought year. We still had some thorn mint and tar plant germinate in the fall, but that's what it looks like in January, this last January, so a year ago. And it's dry. I mean, some of the places were like, wow, the weeds were dying. It was so dry. You know, we did follow-up weed control in those areas. As I mentioned, we were controlling fennel and artichoke thistle as part of that, because they changed the dynamics of the clay lens and grassland so much. then you gotta watch out for these guys because they're in the habitat. That's a red diamond rattlesnake, and that's actually a little baby juvenile that was less than a year old, so there's actually reproduction going on in those urban canyons still, which is pretty exciting actually. The crew's really good at finding those for us. You know, even though it was a severe drought, you know, here's some natural native bunchgrass areas that were green. It seemed like, you know, either soil conditions or even micro differences in the rainfall showers that happened between the canyons. Some were greener than others. And Dudley variegata, here they are in their vegetative stage. And they actually were doing really well as the project went on, and I'll show you a little more about that in a minute. Here's some before-after pictures. Here's in 2011. Now this is 2014. You'd hope that that's all bright yellow for the tar plant, but no, we had the drought. So these little flags were areas marking tar plant seedlings that germinated back in February, early March. But by the end of the season, all of those had died, none flowered. You know, they got maybe that big or so, and then the drought took them out. Here's another spot. There's the before we dethatched and started the program, and there's in June. So you know, at least even though there wasn't a lot of tar plant growth, we got a lot of bare ground now with way less weed cover to, you know, promote the natives over the long term. Here's kind of a summary of the population numbers and associated rainfall each season. So the 2011 numbers, that's prior to implementation. We were able to, just the timing, we were able to get some baseline numbers. And you can see it was the rainfall was actually above average that year. It's about 10 inches for Chula Vista annually. And so after we dethatched and did follow-up weed control, look at that, we got significantly less rainfall, but way more plants. So, and then the same thing happened even more. Look at the rainfall's going down, but the plant numbers are going up. Now, there was initial flush in the thorn mint numbers here. Not all of those successfully flowered, but there was just thousands, obviously, thousands more plants. But, you know, that's the area where we dethatched only, so we didn't do follow-up weed control. So, you know, it's one of those things over the long term, you're going to need to do management for those areas. But even though, you know, each year we're going successfully downward here, but, you know, we still had tar plant and thorn mint, even in that crappy rain year, you know, and the star of the show was the Dudley, because it kept increasing. And we think, you know, not only was that recruitment, but when those plants are so tiny and covered with the weeds, one, they may survive in there for a number of years, but they're on the decline, they're not visible, so obviously, you know, it's just over time with the weed control program, that species definitely benefited. For long-term management, you know, we would, if your funding is not, you know, great, you could do that dethatching with the weed eaters. It's something volunteers potentially could do, because when you do it in the fall, you know, you're minimizing your impacts and so on. Also, if you can have funding for the long term, then you would want to do follow-up weed control if you can do it. Here's some acknowledgments for people through the City of Chula Vista, Flynn Lobby, and then RECON biologists that worked on it. And then this was a picture I took a couple days ago down there, which we've had a much better start so far with the rains, you know, and so there's the thorn mint and tar plant growing, so there's hope for the future.